All right, thank you. So, good morning everyone. I'm Henk Uijterwaal from the RIR NCC, and I'll be talking about AS numbers missing in action. Okay, so this is today's agenda. I'll tell you why I got started in this business. I'll say a few words about the data sources we used, and I'll come to the results. And like the speaker before me, we also did some modeling. Okay, I'll go to this fairly quickly, since I assume that everybody in this room knows what an AS is. Each AS needs its own unique identifier, its AS number. AS numbers are assigned in a hierarchical way, starting from IANA, then to the RIRs, the LIRs, and finally to the end users. And this guarantees uniqueness, and the IANA plus the RIRs keep public registers of all AS numbers in use. Like Jeff explained in the previous talk, AS numbers are currently 16 bits. There's some private use, some overhead, and you end up with 64,500 available. So who has an AS? Basically anybody who asks for it and who qualifies according to an AS assignment policy. And this policy is based on RFC 1930 and local policies by the RIRs. And I won't describe them in any detail. It basically comes down to, if you can demonstrate that you need one, you'll get one. Another important factor is that the policies all say that if the need for the ASN disappears, you have to return it to the registry. And I will get back to that later. So, next question. Can we see which AS are in use? Well, the internet is a network of ASs. Each AS wants to be able to send traffic to any other AS. So, the RIPs in your router have to have a list of all the ASs. Well, we also assumed that ASs are assigned based on demonstrated need. So if you think a bit naively, every AS that's ever been assigned must show up in the RIP, right? Well, not exactly. Some 2 years ago, I looked at the RIPs and the registry files, and back then some 20,000 ASs had been assigned by the RIRs, and some 300 coming up new every month. At the same time, in the RIP, only 14,000 of them were visible, and only 200 new ones appeared every month. So I was a bit surprised with this, and basically asked the obvious question, what's happening here? And that's what this talk is about. So, where can you find data on ASs in use? Well, the first source is statistics files published by the RIRs. Every day, the RIRs, since sometime in 2002, they publish a list of all the ASNs, dates assigned, and a few other bits and pieces like the countries they have been assigned to. This is a report published daily since 2002, but if you look at the dates of the assignments, you can extrapolate back for earlier dates. If you do this, you have to. There are some obvious mistakes in all those files. You have to, in all the results I'm going to show next, we corrected for those. If you want to see the details, we have a full write-up available where you can see all the corrections we made to this data. Next place you can look at are the RIPs. There are several projects collecting RIPs. One of them is the RIR NCC Routing Information Service. This project collects the RIPs 3 times a day from 450 odd peers, both IPv6 and IPv4. Besides the RIP, it collects all the BGP updates. So what we did was take the data from middle of August 2000 till August 1st of this year, took all the BGP paths we ever saw in this data, we broke them down into their components, the AS numbers, and this just generates a list of AS and the time when they were used. So the first days they showed up, the last days they showed up. From this list we removed private ASs, even though they should not be visible on the net. People do announce them, we just removed them from our sample. And we also removed ASs seen for less than a week. We assume that, in particular, when people announce ASs into from the unallocated ranges, this is a typo or something, and if it's a mistake, well, we hope that people recover within a week. And finally, there's the CIDR report, which is a weekly report on the internet, as seen from AS 4637. It's available since 1994. That makes it one of the oldest data series on the internet that's available. And one of the things in the report is the number of AS seen in the RIP for this AS. So after this, we have essentially two lists. One is the AS numbers assigned by the RIRs, the stats files, sort of the theory. And the other list is the ASs in use, the ones you see in the RIS and the CIDR reports. And then you can put the two lists next to each other. Well, the normal case is, of course, that an AS appears in both lists. The second category is an AS that's seen in use, so in the RIS or in the CIDR report, but it's not assigned. And this can happen, people inappropriately using ASs or problems with the registration mechanism. And then there's a third category, ASs which are assigned but not in use, and we call those ASs missing in action. So let's look at the second category, ASs in use but not registered. In those 5 years, we saw 436 ASs that were used at some point but not registered. 255 of them were still visible on August 1st of this year. We then looked at it more closely, found 215 of them in RIP NCC's administrated ranges, 14 in ARN's ranges. Looking further, we actually went to the basement of the RIP NCC, dig through all the old files there, and found that there was some data available for 214 of them. 7 ASs, not in this 436, were ASs outside any range by any of the RIRs. And this is a problem in the registration mechanism. Registration of ASs has gone through a couple of phases. Things have been handed over and transferred, and some ASs just fell through the cracks, and that's being corrected. Overall accuracies, there are some 33,000 ASs assigned at the moment, and at most 41 have no records. So that's 0.1%. And people always complain about the fact that this registration data is highly inaccurate. Well, I don't think it's that bad. Okay, so now turning at the total number of ASs seen. And somehow this should have been animated, but okay, it isn't. There are two curves here. Assigned, which is in blue and in purple, and actual use, so in the RIS or in the CIDR report, in red and green. And this is the number of ASs seen in those statistics since 1995. And you can see a couple of things in this curve. First thing is sort of 2000, a little before 2000, late 1999. You see that the rate starts to pick up. And this is presumably the start of the internet bubble. We all know that the internet bubble lasted for a couple of years, and by late 2001, early 2002, you see the rate in both curves decrease again. One thing to notice there is that the increase in actual seen on the net is sort of back to the rates before the internet bubble, while the rates which things are assigned is still much higher than before the start of the internet bubble. So what presumably is happening here is that people making plans still continue to make plans and get ASs assigned based on those plans, but in practice a lot of these plans never make it to reality. The other thing is, because the slopes are different, before 1999 you had a constant number of ASs missing in action. Since 1999 it's starting to diverge. Next thing is this what kind of growth model is here? And I've been looking at essentially the blue curve, so the rate, the growth of the assigned AS numbers. I did a couple of tests. First of all, I tried to fit them to linear and exponential curves. And on the next plot, yep, there you go. You see the data points in red. You see the solid line for a linear fit and a dotted line for an exponential fit. And this is sort of the last 2.5 years. And what you see is that the linear fit describes the data the best. The exponential fit does it sort of in the middle, but if you look at both the high end and the low end, it starts to diverge. So, no. So this indicates linear growth. Another thing is you can look at is the derivatives, so number of assigned per month. If this would be an exponential curve, it would grow. Well, it doesn't. So, contrary to, for example, the Jeff's results, and there are some small difference in what we actually did, we seem to believe that this is still linear growth. Okay. So, looking at the growth rates in more detail, this number is the plot shows the number of assigned ASs per month. In red is what's newly allocated, and you see it fluctuated a bit in the beginning, sort of 2001, 2002 regions, and for the last couple of years it has been fairly constant. If you do the average, it's about 284 plus or minus 43 new allocations per month. At the same time, ASs disappear, so they're used as they don't show up in the tables anymore. And you see that this is also constant for the last three or 4 years at about 105 per month. If you look at the latest data, you see a peak in the blue line. I'll explain that on the next slide. This is a plot for all the registries. You can also split it up per registry. So let's first do that for Aaron. And here you see 3 curves. In red, you see new assignments per month. In green, you see new plus reassignments. So a new assignment is an AS that's being used from the unused pool, has never been assigned before. A reassignment is an AS that has been in use, was recovered, and is then reassigned to another entity. And finally, in blue, you see ASs disappearing. And you can note 2 things here. One of them is that since the middle of 2004, ASNs are actually being recovered, up to around 50 a month. And then since the start of 2005, you see that the green and the red curves diverge. And this is the ASs that were recovered being reassigned. Second area you can look at is the RIP and CCs area. Same plots, However, you see that there is very little recovery, and you also see that in this region the rate seems to increase where it was pretty flat, where the total is pretty flat. And the reason that the total is pretty flat is that Aaron is recovering. Now, you can also make these plots for the 3 other registries, but they don't show much interesting. Next plot is fraction of ASs seen. So this is over time ASs seen divided by ASs assigned. Various cases, without going into detail, you see that it has been stable at around 60 to 63% since 2001, and yeah, that's about all you can say about this plot. So, ASs you don't see on the internet. On August 1st, 32,800 ASN had been assigned. 20,000 were visible in the RIS, so on the net, and of the 12,000, 7,000 were assigned but never used, and 5,000 had been used at some point but were retired. So if you then look at those 5,000 retired ASs, and you look at the age they had, so date of assignment, and start to show up until the last date seen that they were seen on the net. What you see here is a peak. Basically, people use ASs for a couple of years. The scale is in months, so 50 months is about 4 years. And after that, ASs disappear. So people use an AS for a few years, then return it. Another way to look at it is, ASs which are still active over time. So this plot shows since 1990 till up to 2005 the number of ASs which are still active divided by the number of ASs that were still assigned. And what you see is that if you look at the right hand side of the plot, about 80% of the ASs assigned in 2004 is active. And if you then go to the left, so go back into time, it drops. For example, the ASs which were assigned 10 years ago, only 40% is still being used. And okay, if you go back more than 10 years, the fluctuations are quite large. But this is mainly due to statistics. Very few ASs were assigned in those days. Yeah, so one AS already makes a huge difference. Okay, continuing. So why do we see this behavior? Well, we believe that there are 2 effects. First thing is that sites go out of business. Now, if a site is about to go out of business and you're cleaning up the networks and all the engineers are brushing up their CVs and trying to find another job, well, there's little incentive to return unused resource. I mean, who cares? You're trying to get out of there. Also, the RIRs are not actively recovering those ASs. Second effect is that networks tend to merge. Small ISPs are being bought by bigger ISPs, and after a short while after the takeover, they usually start to combine their networks, and when that happens, the need for one AS disappears. But again, they're already a member of their RIR. There's no financial incentive for them to return their unused ASs. So they just keep it, and the AS is no longer visible on the net. So this is why ASs disappear. The other thing is activation. People get their ASs based on plans. And they are assigned on some date, and you can compare the assignment date with the first day that they appear on the net. And this is a plot for data from 2004. It has red, green, purple and blue, the 4 registries which were active at that time. And what you see is on the x-axis is the number of days, and on the y-axis is the fraction of ASs that had been assigned, which is actually visible. And what you see that after about a month, well, for about 40% of the assigned ASs appear. If you wait about 3 months or 90 days, well, it's roughly 2 out of 3. And if you wait a long time, I mean, say 250 days, 300 days, you see that the curve starts to flatten off. So, and this flattens off at about 80%. In other words, 1 out of 5 ASs which is assigned never appears on the net, or at least not within a year or 2 years' time. And you can make these plots for earlier years as well. You can, they all look pretty much the same. So what's happening here? Okay. Well, there are some policies behind this. RIR has a policy that there must be plans to use an AS within 30 days after the assignment. And that's a criterion which is actually used to assign one. RIP NCC region, there's no policy. However, there was a discussion on one of the policy mailing lists there, and people think that it's reasonable that an AS appears within 3 months after assignment. So this is theory. In practice, it doesn't happen. It's for the ASs that appears, it takes considerably longer. I mean, 60% hasn't made it for the RIR in 30 days. 1 out of 3 doesn't make the 3 months criterion from the RIP region. What? Okay, sure. So, and finally 20% never appears even though there was a demonstrated need. Okay, let's model this a bit. So the first question people ask is, when will the AS run out of 16-bit ASNs? So we have 64,000 available. We assign 33,000 were assigned, and we assigned 280 per month. So if we put that in and we assume our model of linear growth, we run out in about 8 to 11 years, which is 2013 to 2016. Obviously, if you put in Jeff's model of exponential growth, it will be a little bit shorter. Can we make this last longer? Sure. First thing is we reclaim and reassign what disappears. If we do that, we're down to 179 assignments per month, and we're sort of looking at the 2020 range, plus or minus a couple of years. And finally, we can also reclaim what's assigned but it's not being used. You're down to 160 a month, and that buys you, buys you another 8 years, and you're looking at 23 years from now. So yes, you can make it last longer if we would all become responsible netizens. Of course, you can make the pool last 1 million years if you go to 4-byte AS numbers, and Jeff discussed that. What you have to do to make the pool last longer? Well, make policy changes. Current policies are based on demonstrated needs. Only 63% is actively used, 20% never makes it. So probably it's too easy to demonstrate needs. And one thing the policy working groups of the RIRs can do is revisit the policies and make the criteria a bit tighter. Next thing you can do, reclaim unused resources. Now, reclaiming is kind of hard, since uniqueness is essential in this game. And what will happen if somebody who has an AS stops using it for whatever reason, and after a few years decides, oh yeah, it was given to me a few years back by the RIRs, I'll just use it again, and in the meantime the thing has been reassigned. So far there has been no good mechanism for recovery, but there are efforts in the APNIC and the RIP region to look at certification, and that might be the answer. Well, certification is very simple. each assignment is accompanied by a certificate that shows that a resource is assigned to somebody. Say 1 year, obviously it's renewable, so if you renew it, you don't need to renumber. But if you don't renew it, the certificate expires and the resource can be reused. This will be people doing peering and setting up routings to check that the certificate is actually valid. But this is something that's expected to become standard practice for securing the routing system anyway. So yes, you can make it last longer. So, to conclude, well, 284 assigned ASs are assigned from the pool per month. Actually, growth is about 160 per month, so there's quite a difference there. If we go on with this 284, we'll run out of ASs by something like 2000 to 2016. And if people want to make this last longer, well, start looking at reclamation, and certification might help. If that doesn't work, well, people should start to think about deploying 4-byte ASs. So ask your vendor, make transition plans, and just put this on your agenda. We have a lot more numbers from this data, and we have a full paper. It's a RIR document, informational RIR document, and you can download it from the URL on the screen. I have to thank a bunch of people who all contributed to this work. And are there any questions?
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom. Henk is looking at the not used numbers. Well, okay, we are seeing numbers that don't appear in the public internet routing as not used. However, well, 20 years ago, the IANA decided wisely that, well, okay, numbers should be given out to people who had, at that time, actually no hope of connecting somewhere and keeping the uniqueness there. These days, I think there are people who do not want to actually connect somewhere, but actually are forming their separate clubs using these resources. And I'm not quite sure whether our policies are allowing them to use the resources and whether the policies should allow them. But, well, okay, if there is any use like that happening, that use might be actually an interesting factor for the coming development and the growth of consumption.
Yeah, okay. I mean, one obvious answer is that most of these applications can be done with using private ASs. And the second thing is, as far as I'm aware, the policies all require that the thing your net should be connected to the public internet. I mean, and that's the current policy. I mean, it's very likely, I didn't do any historic research on this, that it might have been different in the past. But then again, so very few were assigned back in those days.
Well, haven't there been discussions like the mobile phone industry asking, well, okay, where can we get unique resources, being IP4 addresses or AS numbers? And they were advised to use actually the existing registry framework. And, well, okay, there is some good reason not to use private AS numbers where you are actually targeting a system that is open in some sense. Well, okay, using private numbers within the corporate space that I actually think I'm controlling is something very different from using private number space within an industry where obviously no party can exercise control about the other parties joining.
True, yeah.
Right. Tony Tauber, currently with Comcast. Just to clarify or elaborate, I think it's the uniqueness that's important, and even if they're not touching the public internet, if they start to touch each other, I mean, if some people here haven't experienced RC 1918 address overlaps in their life, that's good for them, but I'm sure it's probably just a matter of time before two entities which thought they'd never touch anything else that would matter, you know, just took it upon themselves to use their private address space and do what they wanted, and then, you know, they have to talk to each other. That's a problem. You know, the same holds true for private address space. So.
Randy Bush, IIJ. I just got bitten the other day. I was studying route views data and found weird AS behavior, and it turned out that Aaron has started recycling AS numbers. I'd be interested, you know, it would be very helpful for us who are studying these data if the registries could tell us whether or not they are recycling and could make available the activity periods of an AS. In other words, AS 666 had a life from A to B and a new life from F to Q. It gets pretty surprising. Also, it would be interesting to know if there's significant benefit in this. You know, are you really recovering much space? Is it worth it? Will it extend things from, you know, October 14th to the 16th, or will it extend it 3 years?
Well, okay. So for the speaking for the RIP NCC, I mean, we have that data, so we can make it available. And I see Aaron running up to the microphone.
Yes. Hi, Leslie. Yeah.
So, I mean, we have that data.
Yeah. Anyway, Leslie Nabil with Aaron. We have actually started reclaiming a lot of autonomous system numbers due to non-payment, and I have the data. I'm talking about it later on in the week at our meeting. But we've gotten, in the past 6 months, we've reclaimed 461 ASNs, and we are starting to recycle them. We hold them for a year, and then we've started using them. So I'll publish some stats on that at some point.
Yeah. So, and the other thing is, if I can just show the plots. I mean, if you reclaim what disappears, I mean, it buys you a couple of years, which, yeah, it's. I mean, it's. I mean, the problem that we have to find another solution does not disappear; it just buys us time.